Welcome to Why the Long Face? Two old friends lifting the lid on mental health over a beer with author and psychiatrist Paul Keedwell and business consultant and so-called comedian Ollie Turnbull.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Why the Long Face with me, Oliver Turnbull, and Dr. Paul Keedwell. And during season 4, we've been looking at our friend Ash and the conversations that he's been having with his life coach, Pete. Ash, as he will tell you, was diagnosed with bipolar, and we've been looking at some of the recordings he's made with Pete to go through his journey in some detail and the lows and highs of an particularly intense period of his life. And there's been some really brilliant insights made by Paul as a result of that. So, Paul, are you ready for the trigger?
Yeah. I wouldn't like to say brilliant about my insights. I hope they're kind of
above average.
Yes, exactly. Vaguely useful. But okay, so I'm very much looking forward to listening to this clip because I think this is where Ashley's mood is clearly starting to change. But we can discuss that afterwards.
Yeah, Ash is going to join us after we've played the clip. So let's put it on so you can have a listen. So this is the trigger for the high.
Hi, my name's Ashley. For the last 12 years, I've said I used to have bipolar.
Hi, my name's Peter. I'm a life coach and I support awesome humans like Ashley.
Oh, thank you, Pete. And right, we're now up to episode 4.
So this audio note is the 1st of March. The gaps are getting smaller between our audio notes we're playing. What's going on in this one?
Yeah, so I think this is probably the trigger for the high. So in the last audio note, in the last episode, I mentioned that there was a deadline coming up, that there was this Vodafone competition we'd won. So we were rushing to get the website ready to go for Vodafone to spend some money pushing people, promoting us with Facebook ads to come to the site. So we'd worked up to this deadline to have something that was good enough, not perfect, but would show off what we were wanting to sell, to get people to do this personality assessment thing, to collect some emails, to start building customers. And well, we'll hear it in the audio note, but it turned out that deadline wasn't quite what I thought it was. But to achieve it, in the end, I had to just work ridiculous hours. Right. The weekend was coming up, and I remember I needed a break. Yeah. I remember even saying to Jess, I just need to take this weekend off. And then she said, no, we've got to have this stuff ready for, I can't remember what it was, Tuesday, whatever. And so I worked through the night for 2-3 days, completely exhausted myself. And yeah, that's what I remember about it. I can't actually remember exactly what's in this one, but let's have a listen, I think.
Great, let's dive in.
So just on my dog walk, which I'm very grateful to be doing this morning. Yesterday and the last few days have been a bit crazy because I was working to this Vodafone deadline to launch our MVP of Doorstep Gardener, and then it transpired that the date had been delayed, so I didn't need to work quite so full on, which how did I feel? I felt a little bit. I really pushed myself. I didn't go for walks, I didn't stop, I didn't balance myself, so that felt a bit annoying. But being positive, it has given us a very tight deadline, and we've risen to the occasion as a team, and we're in a really, really good state to launch. So I feel we're going to be an amazing place for launching with Vodafone, and then we can do some more pushing of it to out to friends, family, etc., to test everything before we start really pushing. So I'm feeling very positive this morning. I'm feeling calm after the storm in a way, calm after busy, calm after being tired and a bit pushed, and generally broader. I'm excited about stuff, I'm not worried, but I have got the sort of thought in my head that, right, we've done this all, we need to start selling now. Will that happen? I believe strongly it will, but we don't know how it will happen or how long it will take to happen, because it's quite a considered purchase when we're asking people to spend £1,000. So I don't think it's going to be quite the same as the launch of Lockdown Gardener and how crazy that went. But I remain positive that with a bit of hustling, it might require us to research and find people and get them on the phone and get things over the line that way. But yeah, I think it's going to work. I feel really good about that. Meanwhile, making progress with the relationship with Nick to...
So the main thing here that I tune into is this deadline that shifted. And do I sense a sense of deflation almost as you came out of that intense work period? Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, it's a frustration that I know I've pushed myself too much. And although at this point, there's been other points in the audio notes where I mention bipolar, I don't call it out by name here. But the point I'm making about I haven't balanced myself, I haven't gone on dog walks, I haven't been exercising. I remember that weekend, I remember saying to Justine, I need a break. And then this deadline came up, which I wasn't expecting, and that turned out to be not a deadline. So I was pretty angry and annoyed because I realised that I was already, as we heard in the last episode, not switching off, not sleeping enough.
Yeah.
But I was working very hard to keep calm and still be exercising, even though I forgot in the last episode to say that I had a shoulder injury. So that was the other thing that happened. I played tennis, but I couldn't play tennis because of the shoulder injury.
Which happened from the ski
holiday.
Right.
So yeah, stuff happens. That's why I stopped exercising as much. But anyway, I was trying to, and here was this very short, sustained period where I'd crossed the line, I think.
And during this intense work burst leading up to the soft deadline, were you still going for walks and finding the balance within that period?
No, this was
went out the window.
Through the weekend, from early in the mornings through the night, like ridiculous hours.
Right.
Just to completely... I think we had plans that weekend and we just cancelled everything and it was
just hunkered down.
Which I'm very happy to do, right? I mean... I'm currently speaking to people about new roles. I'm prepared to work hard.
Yeah.
I like a deadline.
Right.
But this was crazy. This was not just working on messaging and stuff, like working on the very structure of what the business was and that the website worked. And it was
a whole lot.
It wasn't just one bit of work I had to do. It was a huge breadth of work.
Yep.
Pulling on different bits of my brain, from designing things to how stuff is messaged, and also... because I'm working with my wife, you know, when we're meant to be having a break as a couple on the weekend, the intensity of that in my home environment as well.
Right, yeah, always on.
Literally, yeah.
So you've worked on launching the business, the deadline move, but ultimately you were aiming on launching, you know, and as we know now, post-analysis, this was also the launch of a crash. You know, this was really ramping up to the top of the mania phase, if I understand.
Yep.
So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so when I listen to myself here, there's still this reflectiveness, this positivity. So maybe to people listening to this, you know, this is someone who's going into a high. I listen to myself and I still sound fairly logical at this point. By hearing what I'm saying... that I am being positive about, right, we're launching. And I'm aware that it's quite possible this couldn't work or might not work or will work. There's nothing certain. But I'm moving forward with that with positivity, which I think is me trying to balance myself again. But where that inevitably leads to is we are at the beginning of March. The plant season is the end of March. And we've got this fundraising deadline, which is the end of March. So now I've actually got to prove it. And so what happened past this point, and I hinted it in what I'm saying, is I say with a bit of hustling, with hard work, we can make it work. Even if it doesn't work, we can tweak it and make it work. Mm-hmm. And a bit like the audio note in December, where there's this moment I reflect on it and then I back in the ring again.
Yeah.
That's basically what's about to happen here.
Right.
And, you know, basically 4 weeks. in 4 weeks, I'm going to have raised this money because we'd won a competition to be introduced to a number of funds, I think, at this point, and I'd been given an opportunity to go and pitch in London, I think just a couple of weeks later. And the Vodafone campaign goes out, lots of people come to our website, there's lots of interest, people do the personality assessment, but they're not going all the way through to speaking to us.
Okay.
And I think I implicitly knew, and I still believe now, that the concept was well researched. I think there are millions of people who have a garden who don't know what to do with it. And with the right structure, the right expertise, the right framework of a business, I believe very strongly still that it could be a real goer.
Yep.
The challenge is that we were asking people to spend a lot of money on something, and their buying journey is quite complicated. And so the idea that based on a minimum thing that we'd built very simply on a Squarespace website effectively, that they would go from, oh, that sounds great, to buying, I always thought was hugely unlikely.
What was the price point, just out of interest?
Yeah, so when we first set up Lockdown Gardener, it was 50 quid trays of plants.
Right.
Now this is like £1,000 plus.
Right, so the second version of the business.
Yeah, it's a much more considered thing, and that's when I'm saying we don't know how long it will take. You know, does someone hear about our service and buy next year?
Yeah.
But this is a self-financed enterprise. We've already ploughed quite a bit of money into it, and we can't plough lots and lots and lots of money. We need support to
endless.
do that. Yeah,
Right. Yeah, great.
So, yeah, I'm probably subliminally or with hindsight realising that I'm not going to be able to work with the people who have expertise to build up our SEO and our email database. And I've got a whole content strategy, but I can't do it without money. And this deadline's looming. So time is just compressing.
Yeah, right.
So with hindsight, I've used that word a few times, this, I think, is the trigger because it pushes me over the edge into doing everything I possibly can to prove and achieve what I need to achieve in 4 weeks.
Right. Yep.
So there you go. Again, interesting. I love Pete's interventions as well. They all seem very helpful, very calm and very reassuring to Ash, which is, I'm sure, what he needed at that stage. So we'll do what we usually do. Paul, what, as a clinician, do you feel is going on here? I know we know Ash pretty well, but if you divorce yourself from that, what are you feeling about what's happening to him?
Yeah, well, what struck me in episode 3 was, although there were some hints that Ash might already be sort of going into a hypomanic or mild mania type state, the brain not switching off, needing less sleep, you know, the speech was sort of just like Ash always talks. But I did notice in this episode, or this clip, that straight away I noticed that your rate of speech had increased, only marginally, but you were talking faster. And I just thought you're more, there was more, the speech was more sort of affirmative, if you like, and more expressive in a way, you know, tonally, bit more variation, bit more rhythm. So that was the first thing. So not what you were saying, but, you know, the way you were saying it. But then
what do you mean by affirmative? Sorry, Paul, to cut in. What do you mean by affirmative?
More confident, more strident, perhaps. You know.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd love to think of a better word, but it escapes me at the moment. But and then the content of what you're saying is very positive, I think, isn't it? It's you are you know, very future focused. You're kind of pleased with the progress you've made. Pete's intervention, very interesting, because he's got to know you and has been with you through this whole journey. I didn't quite sense the sense of deflation that he was talking about. I did think that you were frustrated to a degree because you were a bit angry about the fact that you'd put yourself through more stress than perhaps you'd needed to, because with the Vodafone contract, because they'd shifted the deadline So you'd worked really hard to meet this deadline, and they said, "Oh, actually, we don't need it right now," and perhaps that had not helped with the high. And just one thing about not taking time for breaks. That's when I wrote down the chicken and egg. Perhaps in because you were trying to use your meditation techniques, but it was very hard for you by this stage. And I think so. It's whether the heavy workload, the taking on all this work, was a reflection of your mild mania, or whether it was just the case that you had to plough on without breaks.
It's interesting when I reflect on these points with Pete, and also talking to you now, based on where I'm sitting today, because at the moment my life is quite sort of calm and reflective. I've been looking at job roles, things are ticking over with the gardening business, but the gardening season is basically done, and there's just not a lot of pace to my life. And I remember at this point, this was like, it felt like a sort of war spirit. Like everything had to be done at such a pace, and in reality it didn't. But within my own head, it was like, we've got to fight, we've got to keep going, we've got to kind of, we're in the trenches. Everything was kind of risen up and over significant. And I realised now, talking to my wife, who we mentioned in the previous episode is one of the other partners in this business, I remember her feeling to me like she was massively disengaged with things, but she was probably just being completely normal about it. And to me, I was frustrated because no one else was working. I remember saying to her once, like, you're not working as hard as me, and being really irritated about it. I mean, we obviously, we're listening to these audio notes of what I think about the situation in the recordings, and the recordings with Pete are done, in the last couple of weeks, so after the event.
Yeah.
But one thing we should fill in is I was being a complete pain in the arse at this point.
Right.
I was irritable. I would sort of pick a fight easily. I would have a go about things easily. I would be charming to one person and then not very nice to Justine.
Was she making any observations? Was she saying? Was she making any observations about your behaviour other than your being a pain in the arse husband? Was she saying, do you think this might be part of an episode where you're having a high, or was she just pissed off with you?
Yeah. I mean, again, it had been 12 years since anything had happened. It felt like I'd figured out the magic formula, because so many things had happened in those 12 years that should have, in brackets, triggered or could have triggered this. I mean, when we adopted our son and my business pretty much went under at that point, like really stressful things that hadn't triggered an episode. So,
but do you think that she knew at this point that you were going through a kind of a high?
No.
A lot of people don't pick up on irritability as a sign of mania, and it is. It's a well-known feature of hypomania or mania is irritability, because people are not always elated. They're commonly irritable, and it's sort of fueled by this fact that your brain is going much faster than everybody else's. So why aren't you keeping up with me? Why
yeah.
Why do I have to finish your sentences for you? Why am I taking over you, talking over you?
There was around this time I got annoyed about our other partner because he wasn't putting in the hours that we were. But the reality is those hours I was putting in were my decision. It wasn't what was necessary, it's what I was capable of doing. And of course, that was frustrating that people weren't keeping.
Yeah, because you had way more energy than the normal person, the average person, and needed less sleep. I mean, that's a classic feature, sort of, okay, I'm down to sort of 4 hours sleep a night, but I still have loads of energy. I mean, that's not the state of a sort of what we call euthymic person who's not high, not low.
The point you make about irritability is interesting, because when I reflect on it, when I had bipolar, when I was diagnosed in my 20s and up until when I got on top of it, Justine and I were dating, and then we were living together. So I think this point about irritability, we realised after this latest episode that no, she didn't realise that was a trigger. and that was indicating something. So another one for the scrapbook of insights as to my state of mind. I think now if that happened again, she would have more of an awareness of that.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the fact, as you say, you hadn't had an episode for quite a long time, and this time as well, it was sort of possibly modified by the medication, stop you going too high to the point where it became more obvious. I remember in the old days when you had a high, it was obvious to Justine that you were high because you were talking. You were much more disinhibited with strangers. You were talking to strangers on the train and sort of talking in monologues, and that was a sort of much more obviously abnormal. But in this case, it was hard to disentangle from the fact that you had this deadline, and everyone has to work hard for deadlines. But in this case, it just went a bit too far, and it's like Pete said in the previous clip in episode 3. Where is the line that's sustainable, where you're nurturing yourself as well as doing the job? I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about here. The fact you took no breaks was because you were as if driven by a motor, the motor of mania.
Saying it really goes back to one of the themes that's running through this is what is helpful and what is not helpful. And some of the things in a high are not helpful because they exhaust you and annoy those around you. And some things in the low are paradoxically useful. And is there something that the brain is telling you in these periods that you should take account of? The other thing I would point out from the recording is how positive you were sounding. You sounded even less tired than you had in the previous episode, as far as I could work out from the Can't Switch Off. So it looks as if something was triggered in you that made you almost superhuman, I would say. But yeah, like Pete says, there is a balance to be drawn between using your superhuman powers and then realizing that it's getting a bit too much, maybe.
Yeah, I mean the point I was going to make. Yeah, I think that's very true. Is this talking to you guys is making me reflect on the micro details and the macro details. So we're talking about these subtle shifts and exactly how I'm feeling at this point. But you've got to remember contextually, and this will be the case across the country, I mean, I'm abroad, but across the UK, that these are extraordinary times, right? We've just gone through COVID. I mean, I was surprised that COVID didn't trigger something in me, but it did trigger me starting a new business, which was very exciting and dynamic. So I think for my wife, she was excited about this. Right, I'd kind of figured out this idea around using technology and artificial intelligence, and there were a lot of indicators around that this wasn't a bad idea by getting onto courses and winning competitions. There was a lot of kind of, that was giving me kind of credibility in a way. And so I think Justine was excited that I had energy to pursue something with a vigour to make it successful. And bearing in mind, as a family, she wasn't working and money was tight. I think she was prepared to put up with quite a lot.
I think, yeah, because I think in earlier episodes, you were saying, I remember there's a telling line about you went home for Christmas, or you went to Justine's parents, and there was this sort of feeling that you needed to succeed, that you felt that they had expectations of you, and so it wasn't really relaxing, because you already felt a lot of pressure on yourself as someone who should be the provider in the family, and desperate to make a kind of financial success of your creativity, which you used to sort of do just for its own sake because it was fulfilling. But now you had these added pressures.
Yeah, it feels like the last couple of years have been much more explorative for me, and maybe that's an interesting point. As a human being, I think I've needed to go through that to figure out my place in the world. And similarly, my boat polo was kicked off in my early 20s when I was trying to find my place in the world. So maybe there's something about these periods of transition where it's just inevitable that we go through change and things happen, and that's going to leave us more vulnerable to incidents like this.
One comment I will make, which one insight, is that there isn't always a clear single trigger for an episode. I mean, there probably is in this case, but often it's a build-up of pressure, and then eventually you reach a point where you pass your elastic limit, if you like. You're springing back from stresses, but then at some point they accumulate to the point where you tip over into an illness or an episode. And if you think about it, the background to all this, even before you set up this startup, was the pandemic, which was stressful for everybody. The move to a different island, different country, different home, and a young child who needs schooling, money, pressures, all these things in the background, what we call chronic life difficulties, were the context leading up to this episode, where you then had the trigger, perhaps, which was the deadline, the self-imposed pressure of the startup, and possibly unrealistic goals for success within a short period of time, rather than being patient with yourself. I used to say, and it came out in my book actually, that when we become depressed, it's often because it's not because we've set a goal which is quite lofty and ambitious. That's okay. You can have ambition. But the standards by which you measure your progress towards achieving that goal, if you don't give yourself enough time and those standards are not realistic, then you are setting yourself up for a crash. You're setting yourself up to fail. Well, in your case, you might be setting yourself up for a hypomanic episode, which is, as you know, stress can be triggered by stress, which then followed by a crash. But
that sounded to me like a really plausible hypothesis about the journey. And no hypothesis can be 100% clear, which must make your job very frustrating, Paul. But it sounded exactly like what happened to Ash. Maybe you'd like to comment back on that, Ash, and then we'll prepare ourselves for the next episode, which will be basically the high. What do you think about Paul's hypothesis?
Yeah, I think that escalating series of events grouping together and then this on top, I guess that gives the framework for this whole series, because episode 1, it was me explaining why I was about to take these next steps, and they were based on that journey. That's what kind of fascinates me. It's like I've got the insight from doing this startup in COVID. I think it's a good place to put my energies and my efforts. And you can't really argue with that. But clearly, I think money predominantly, I would say, was the most significant one that's been going on for a few years in terms of having stability within myself to provide. And I think we talked about this on a previous episode. The logic that was going to come from a startup is interesting, but the intention.
But I love this idea. From Paul. It's almost an optimistic idea in a way, that it doesn't matter about goals. It's not setting your goals high. It's being reasonable with yourself on the journey to reaching those goals, which sometimes can cause problems. I think that's a real insight, and it really seems to align up without sort of leading the witness to what you've experienced. I'm wondering if we should prepare ourselves for the next one. So the next one is In the High, working title. And Ash, I don't know if you want to set the scene, but this is going to be episode 5, and we're going to be whilst you're in the maelstrom of that high that you describe.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll hear it in more detail on the next episode, but the thing that's maybe most fascinating is that the audio notes kind of stopped. And the clip that we're going to share next time isn't one of these audio notes. It's something I happen to have sent to someone, which I think captures some of that state. So, yeah, I look forward to next episode to pick that apart with you guys.
Thanks so much. Final thoughts, Paul?
Yeah, I think, in retrospect, this episode, although we've called this episode, this particular episode of the season, the trigger, the episode of the hypomania, I think in retrospect, started back in episode 3 and is continuing through episode 4, and then we might see that it's more obvious in episode 5. So I hope you'll all join us for next week for the next episode.
Yeah, see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Bye.